Hello to all who watch this video. I'm Bunmei. Today we have a theory of Izuku, so get your popcorn ready. This is about to begin.
Agent Izuku. A tragic ending. Part 1. Izuku Midoriya, of stocky build and green hair, stood alone on the balcony of his flat. As the smoke from a cigarette drifted through his fingers, his weary expression revealed the weight of a world that had despised and rejected him for not possessing a quirk. With a gesture of frustration, Izuku clenched the still-lit cigarette and tossed it behind him into a bin without even looking. His life had been tinged with constant misery. There were times when he dreamed of being a hero, believing that even someone without quirk could make a difference. Yet, like so many other times in his life, that dream seemed to fade, leaving him trapped in a hopeless reality. This bleak outlook contrasted sharply with the determined young man he once was, one who defied the odds with nothing but courage and a burning desire to help others. But reality, stark and persistent, insisted on reminding him of his limitations at every turn. Izuku returned to his room, intending to lie down and seek some respite from the thoughts that plagued him. However, as he passed the bedside table, his gaze fell upon the portrait of a girl. His eyes filled with sadness as he murmured in a broken voice, "You don't know how much I miss you." She had been the only one who truly supported him, and now she was gone, lost in circumstances Izuku couldn't forgive himself for. Guilt consumed him every time he remembered that fateful day filled with screams and explosions that echoed in his mind like a cruel echo. He tried to shake his head, desperate to forget, but the memories clung to him with the tenacity of shadows at dusk. With mechanical movements, he stripped off his uniform, a black polo shirt with dark green shades that fitted tightly to his muscular body and trousers with metal knee pads. He kicked off his combat boots and was left in just boxers, feeling the chill of the night contrast with the warmth of his skin. He lay down on the bed, closed his eyes, but sleep was denied him once again. It was always the same, his mind cruelly made him relive the worst moments, leaving him in a sea of sleeplessness and remorse. Izuku knew he needed to find a way to deal with his past, but that night, like many others, forgiveness seemed as distant as the stars he couldn't see from his window. Izuku closed his eyes and, in the darkness of his room, his mind traveled back in time to his early years, those days marked by pain and trauma. He vividly remembered when, at the age of 4, he and his twin sisters, Hikari and Kagura, accompanied their parents, Inko and Hisashi Midoriya, to the hospital. His family always attracted stares of wonder and murmurs. The Midoriya were well known not only for their status, but for the powerful quirks they possessed. Inko's family had telekinesis abilities, while Hisashi's line boasted dragon-like traits, giving them great strength and the ability to exhale fire. Both branches of the family were respected and even feared for their awesome power. From an early age, their parents instilled in them that power and money were everything in life, a message that constantly echoed in their ears. However, Izuku, gifted with great intelligence, soon realized that reality was more complex and that power and money were not enough to define a person's worth or happiness. Despite this conviction, he never dared to contradict his parents, whose convictions were deeply rooted. Despite their rigidity about the importance of power and money, Inko and Hisashi strove to be good parents. Even with their demanding careers as heroes, they always found time to spend with their children, striving to offer them love and attention, trying to balance their professional lives with their parental responsibility. This duality in his parents left Izuku with mixed feelings, admiring their dedication, but questioning the lessons they were trying to teach him. As he lay in his bed, trying to fall asleep, Izuku let memories of his childhood wash over him, images of happier days playing with his twin sisters, Hikari and Kagura. But nostalgia soon gave way to sadness, and he couldn't help but ask himself, with a whisper of pain, why did they abandon me? Although he could see these memories, he was trapped in the role of a mere observer, unable to alter the course of events that had so marked his life. He remembered clearly the day his family had gone to the hospital, a day that had started out hopeful but quickly turned bleak. To everyone's surprise, his sisters had inherited powerful combinations of their parents' quirks. Hikari had gained dragon strength and telekinesis, while Kagura exhibited fire breath and telekinesis as well. When Izuku's turn came, the silence grew heavy. Nothing happened, or rather, something happened that he would never forget, starting with the doctor's words. "Surrender, you'll never be a hero, the doctor declared coldly. His parents were initially furious, indignant at such disrespect towards their son. However, the situation took an even more disheartening turn when the doctor added, "Your son is quirkless." Hearing this, his parents' vehement defense of Izuku vanished as if it had never existed. Instead of support, what followed was a look of anger, as if somehow, the lack of a quirk was Izuku's fault. This reaction not only broke his heart, but also marked the beginning of a deep sense of isolation and rejection within his own family. Izuku's sisters looked at him with a mixture of surprise and sadness, but what stood out most was a glint of rejection in their eyes. The journey home passed in stony silence, and the next day, when Izuku awoke, he found the house surprisingly empty. On the floor, a note written by his mother lay folded. The message inside it wounded him deeply. "Hello, scum. From today, you will not be a Midoriya, from today, you will not be our son. For I never gave birth to someone useless like you. Legally, you are no longer our son and we have erased all records linking us to you. Likewise, we disinherit you of any assets. Luckily, I am not that evil and you will receive a sum of money enough to keep you from dying, but once you turn 15, I will stop." Falling to his knees, Izuku cried like never before. From that moment on, something became painfully entrenched in his heart. Power and money were everything in this world. He got up from the ground, wiped his tears and began to train. From the age of 4 until now, he had never stopped. When Izuku opened his eyes and saw that it was morning, he got up and looked at himself in the mirror. "I look awful," he said to himself, but with a steely determination that reflected his resolve to overcome adversity, no matter the cost. Despite rejection and loneliness, Izuku had forged a path of his own, fueled by resilience and a willingness to prove himself wrong about a person's true worth. Izuku faced his morning reflection, dark circles under his eyes and green, untidy hair that had grown out from lack of cuts over the years. He prepared his breakfast quickly, readying himself for another day at his demanding job. As he walked through the city streets, his mind slipped involuntarily to another memory, a second trauma that had scarred him deeply. For a moment, he closed his eyes, reliving that day he hated so much, but which had also changed his life. Izuku stood in front of All Might, Japan's #1 hero, the idol of millions. Minutes earlier, All Might had told him that his dream of becoming a hero was impossible given his quirkless status, a devastating blow to any aspiring hero. In an unexpected twist, however, the encounter took a different turn. All Might looked him in the eye and in a firm voice said something that lit a spark of hope in his heart. "You can be a hero." Izuku was overcome with joy. In those moments, he learned about the one for all, and that he would be the next successor of that powerful quirk. Despite his doubts and fears, All Might's words offered him a new sense of purpose. He felt validated and understood for the first time in a long time, and the weight of familial disapproval began to lighten, if only a little. After receiving the one for all from All Might, Izuku set himself the monumental task of cleaning up a garbage dump on the beach, an initial challenge meant to strengthen his body and will. Contrary to expectations, he completed this task in just 5 months thanks to his already formidable physical condition. By the end, he had not only cleaned up the beach, but also gained a deep understanding of his new gift. He spent the next 5 months training intensively, analyzing and perfecting the most effective way to use his power to minimize the risk of injury. Although he fully mastered one for all, he decided to keep this a secret, informing All Might that he had only mastered 20% of his ability. During this time, Izuku experienced a surprising evolution within himself. He felt as if the one for all was adapting and growing in sync with his body, becoming more integrated and powerful by the day. In a twist of fate, while training, Izuku met Katsumi Bakugo, a tenacious and strong-willed young woman, known for her somewhat volatile but undeniably attractive temperament. Despite initial differences, their shared passion for training and desire to better each other quickly brought them closer. In a matter of weeks, what began as a goal-driven friendship developed into a deep relationship. Together, not only were they advancing in their skills, but their love was growing, or at least that's what he thought. For Izuku was oblivious to Katsumi's true motives for being with him. She was attracted to his strength and the connection Izuku had with All Might, which drew her closer to him, sometimes watching from the shadows as he conversed and trained with Japan's #1 hero. Izuku's happiness, however, was abruptly cut short. Just a day before UA registration, All Might confronted him with a serious expression that did not bode well. "Young Izuku, tell me your last name," All Might asked, urging him not to lie. "I'm sorry, All Might, for lying to you. I am not an orphan. I used to have a family. I was a Midoriya," Izuku confessed, fearful of disappointing his mentor. Contrary to his fears, All Might's reaction was unexpected. He extended his hand not to offer comfort, but to ask for something unthinkable. "Give me back my gift, liar," All Might exclaimed, his voice thick with anger and frustration. Izuku froze, unable to immediately comprehend what was happening. His master's request echoed in his mind, cruel and disconcerting. He did not understand why the revelation of his family name would provoke such a reaction, nor why the truth about his family would so drastically change All Might's trust in him. Heartbroken and confused, Izuku now faced not only the possible loss of his quirk but also the disapproval of the figure he had most admired. Devastated, Izuku handed the "one for all" to All Might, tears streaming freely down his face. Between sobs, he managed to articulate his confusion and despair. Why are you doing this to me, All Might?" His voice broke completely as he collapsed to the ground, overwhelmed by the feeling that all his efforts and dedication had been in vain. All Might watched him with a look devoid of sympathy. "You're not worth my time," the hero said, tossing him a folder before leaving the room. It took him 25 minutes to calm down enough to open the folder. What he found inside ignited a fury he had never felt towards his family before. The folder contained documents accusing them of horrendous crimes he had allegedly committed: physical abuse of his sisters, assaulting other children for being a Midoriya, sexual abuse of female classmates, and even attempted abuse of his own sisters. Izuku closed the folder quickly, nauseated by the falsehoods that had been attributed to him. Now he understood why no school had accepted him and why it was impossible for him to get a job. His record was tainted with a myriad of crimes of which he was not even aware. His contempt for his family had intensified, and now extended to his country's heroes and government, whose systems seemed to have colluded against him for no reason. In that moment, Izuku felt the weight of injustice crush him, giving him a new perspective on what it meant to be a hero and who truly deserved to bear that title. As Izuku processed the betrayals and disappointments, the idea that power and money were everything became more firmly entrenched in his heart. He thought he had his girlfriend's support, but her reaction to adversity left him even more devastated. With sarcasm and disdain, she said, "Huh, do you think I'll stay with someone like you? You have nothing, you have no quirk, you have no money, you don't even have a home. You have no future." The words hurt him deeply, but what came next was even more cruel. Izuku discovered that All Might had transferred the "one for all," the gift he had fought so hard for, to his girlfriend. This betrayal not only came from the one he considered his mentor, but also meant a devastating emotional betrayal. With his soul overwhelmed by pain and betrayal, Izuku opened his eyes and found himself in front of the imposing structure of the Heroes Public Safety Commission, one of Japan's most iconic buildings. Standing there, in front of the institution that symbolizes justice and heroism, he felt a biting irony. Those who were supposed to be the defenders of justice had carelessly allowed his life to crumble. Izuku let out a low growl, a product of irritation at the memory of his third trauma. After being abandoned by All Might, he devoted himself more earnestly to his training and, against all odds, managed to join the Heroes Public Safety Commission. At first, he was mocked for not possessing a quirk, which made him the target of numerous humiliations and put-downs. However, his tenacity knew no bounds. Over time, Izuku's achievements and the success of his missions began to surpass those of all his peers. Those who once mocked him were gradually forced to respect him, silenced by the undeniable talent and dedication of the young man without quirk. Izuku's goal did not stop at simply being another agent for the government, he aspired for more. His true ambition was to reach an executive position within the organization, and eventually, to rise to the top of the hierarchy. Izuku did not just seek to prove his worth. He wanted to change the system from within, making sure that no one else faced the contempt and discrimination he had suffered. His struggle was as much personal as it was institutional, a battle for justice and recognition in a world that valued power over true merit. From the age of 15 to 20, Izuku devoted himself tirelessly to working his way up through the ranks of the Heroes Public Safety Commission. His determination and exceptional skills had brought him to the threshold of gaining absolute control of the organization. During a crucial roundtable meeting with 7 influential people, all of them key decision-makers, they were debating who would assume leadership. Izuku was on the verge of being chosen when an unexpected twist changed the course of events. Everyone except him received a message on their devices. After reading the contents, the looks they gave Izuku were of anger and betrayal. Agent Izuku. A Tragic Ending. Part 2. In less than 20 minutes, 40 heroes of the commission surrounded Izuku, arrested him and drove him out of the building. Confused and bewildered, he did not understand the reason for such action until his own phone vibrated with a notification. As he looked at the screen, the message that appeared revealed the cause of his sudden downfall. He had been wrongly accused of treason and corruption, charges that threatened to destroy not only his career but also his life. The notification included details and fabricated evidence that pointed to him as a criminal, leaving him speechless and filled with a deep sense of betrayal and despair. News spread quickly, painting Izuku Midoriya as a Hero Commission executive who had abused his authority with rookie heroines. Several heroines appeared as witnesses, alleging accusations he had never committed. Soon, the scandal went viral, and the entire nation viewed him with contempt. The fallout was devastating. Izuku lost his bank account, the house he had bought with his own money and, most painful of all, his reputation. In a matter of days, he found himself completely stripped of everything he had worked so hard to build. In the midst of this whirlwind of misfortune, the news announced the appointment of a new leader to the Heroes Commission. Upon learning who would take his place, Izuku could not contain his anger and frustration. "Aha!" he shouted, looking up at the sky. "Why do you hate me, world? What have I done to you to deserve this? I'm really worthless in this world," she cried, as tears welled up in a torrent of pain and rage. The final blow was to discover that the new head of the commission was none other than Inko Midoriya, his own mother, a widely respected figure and considered a heroine in both Japan and the United States. This last fact was the cruelest of ironies, for the person who had disowned and disinherited him was now taking control of the position Izuku had fought so hard to attain. In that moment, he felt more alone and betrayed than ever, facing the harsh reality that even his own success had been usurped by those who should have protected him most. For a year, Izuku wandered aimlessly, shunned by a society he once promised to serve and protect. His life had been reduced to basic survival, jobless and without support. He found himself completely alone. He fed on whatever fish he managed to catch in a nearby river and used the river itself for bathing. Although his body showed signs of wear and tear and exhaustion, his fighting spirit refused to be crushed. Even at his lowest state, Izuku did not stop training. He didn't know why, but he felt the need to stay strong, to keep fighting against adversity, even if he had no clear goal in mind. He spent hours in a public park, where he found a log that he used as a makeshift punching bag. For more than 3 hours every day, he punched and kicked the log with a precision and dexterity that spoke of his near-perfect level of martial arts. One day, after a particularly intense workout, Izuku fell to the ground, panting from exhaustion. Shaking the memories from his mind, Izuku opened his eyes and found himself in the only place that had given him employment after his fall from grace, the Heroes Association. Now, at 25, their perception of him had changed drastically. Where once he had been looked upon with respect, he now faced only hatred and derision from those around him. Izuku made his way to the office where he received the missions. When he arrived, the receptionist looked at him with disdain and spoke to him in a rude tone. "The boss is looking for you, don't be late, you scum. Did you hear me?" she said, not disguising her contempt. Izuku bowed slightly, responding with forced politeness. "Thank you for informing me, I'll be on my way," he said in a calm voice. His expression was impassive, a face that did not reveal the storm of emotions that consumed him inside. He had learned to hide his pain and anger, to maintain a facade of indifference in the face of constant scorn. Izuku maintained his composure for 2 fundamental reasons. The first was purely pragmatic. If he reacted violently, his salary would be cut for 3 months, a financial blow he could not afford. The second reason, much more personal and deeper, came from the words the woman he loved had said to him, "Izuku, the world already has too much hate for you to give it more. You are someone with a pure heart, don't let that part of you that I love disappear." Remembering these words made an involuntary tear slide down her cheek. He decided not to wipe away the tear, the opinion of others had long ceased to matter to him. His path took him past a large gate, the last barrier before he faced another challenge in his day. With a mixture of resignation and determination, Izuku knocked gently on the door and spoke respectfully, despite everything. "Midoriya-sama, may I come in?" From the other side of the door, a female voice, laden with disdain and hostility, replied. "Come in, scum. You may pass." Taking a deep breath to quell the pain those words stirred in him, Izuku opened the door and crossed the threshold, ready to face whatever it took. Each step was a reminder of his promise to himself and the one he loved, to not let hatred consume him, maintaining his integrity in a world that seemed to have lost its own. Izuku crossed the threshold and met the stern, annoyed gaze of Inko Midoriya, his mother. The tension in the room was palpable, and he knew exactly why. Since taking control of the Heroes Public Safety Commission, Inko had sent Izuku on dangerous, near impossible missions in the veiled hope that he would not return. Yet Izuku had survived each one, sometimes wounded, but mostly intact. "I have a mission for you," Inko began, her voice cold and calculating. "As you may know, after the war against AFO, many people have lost faith in heroes. This is due to many factors, and one of them is that heroes are not controlled and sometimes do more harm than good." Izuku nodded, maintaining his silence. Any words could further inflame his ex-mother's ire. "We instituted a new policy," she continued, with a tone of satisfaction she could barely conceal. "Now, one of our agents accompanies a hero on every mission to make sure it doesn't get out of control. And now it's your turn." Inko sketched a faint smile, one that Izuku found ominous. She had paired her son with a heroine who openly detested him, hoping, perhaps, that she might be the cause of Izuku's downfall. Izuku processed the information, his expressionless, hiding the whirlwind of thoughts and emotions churning inside him. The mission wasn't just a challenge, it was a trap, another attempt by his mother to get rid of him. Inko, using her telekinesis, threw an envelope directly at Izuku's face. He didn't move, allowing the blow to hit him without dodging it. She bent down to pick up the envelope, opened it slowly, and as she read the name of her assignment, a heavy sigh escaped her lips. "Rumi Usajiyama," he whispered to himself. "Remember, scum, you're not allowed to attack your partner. Is that clear?" Inko emphasized coldly. Izuku nodded. He understood perfectly well what she implied. He wouldn't be able to defend himself if the heroine decided to attack him. The few previous interactions he had had with her did not bode well for an easy coexistence. Rumi, known for her strong and often impulsive character, was not the kind of person who would make things easy. Exiting the building, Izuku pulled out a cigarette and lit it, letting the smoke briefly fill the space around him. He needed that moment to collect his thoughts before facing what was to come. After walking for 40 minutes, he arrived at Rumi's flat. She did not reside in the common hero housing, she had given up that comfort after the death of a close friend and was now self-employed. Izuku knocked on the door. A tense silence surrounded him as he waited. 5 minutes later, the door slowly opened. When the door opened, Izuku met the intense gaze of Rumi Usajiyama, a heroine of remarkable brunette beauty, adorned with distinctive rabbit ears. However, her appearance was partially marked by a scar that crossed her left eye, adding a touch of hardness to her expression. What really altered the image of serenity he might have projected was the abrupt change in his face, which turned to fury as he recognized Izuku. "What's a villain doing here in my house? Answer me or I'll arrest you," Rumi demanded, pounding the ground in fury, clearly upset by the presence of the man she blamed for her friend's death. Izuku remained silent, aware of the tension that filled the space between them. Carefully, he pulled a note from his pocket and extended it to her as an offer of peace, or at least an explanation. Rumi snatched the note from his hands and read it quickly. Her expression turned from fury to annoyance and then to a grin laden with malice. The note confirmed that they had been officially paired with Izuku, she as the heroine and he as her supervising agent. Despite his initial displeasure at having to work with Izuku, the smile on his face revealed that he understood well the power dynamic this arrangement entailed and the possibilities it offered him. So we're tied to each other, huh? Well, I hope you're ready, because I'm not going to make things easy for you, said Rumi, her tone mixing menace with a tinge of sadistic playfulness. Izuku, despite being at a disadvantageous position, nodded resolutely, preparing himself for what would clearly be one of the biggest challenges of his life so far. Not only would he have to manage the stresses of their joint mission, but also navigate Rumi's personal hostility. Izuku stood still, taking in the imperative tone and anger evident in Mirko's voice. Before he could respond or move, she was already upon him, delivering a blunt blow to his stomach. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and he barely recovered when he felt the blow that knocked him to the ground. Cough, cough, Izuku coughed, trying to catch his breath as he clung to the ground, feeling the weight of the situation. Mirko watched him from above, his red eyes glowing not only with anger but with palpable contempt. Fixing his gaze on him, he spoke each word in a tone that brooked no reply. You will answer me when I speak, you will abide by everything I say without fail. If I say jump, you will jump, if I say let yourself be beaten, you will let yourself be beaten. His voice was cutting, each instruction a lash. Did you understand? With his face still pressed to the cold ground, and pain radiating through his body, Izuku could only nod, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, Mirko, I understood. The situation made it clear that any attempt at argument or disobedience would only bring him more pain and hardship. At this point, Izuku knew he had to handle the situation with caution. Not only was his safety at stake, but also his ability to handle the circumstances in a way that could eventually turn in his favor, or at the very least, not make things worse. Despite the humiliation and unfair treatment, he decided that his best option was to remain calm. As the rain began to fall, Izuku's tears mingled with the water droplets, blurring the line between grief and the somber weather that seemed to reflect his mood. Exhausted and desolate, he lay on the ground, facing the cruel reality of his existence. He felt belittled and devalued, forever scarred by the lack of a quirk. His dreams of heroism seemed more distant than ever, every failure and rejection a constant reminder of his supposed inadequacy. He closed his eyes and sailed back into his memories. He remembered when he met the first person who accepted him. He was in the park and he was on the ground exhausted from training. The rain was a sad reflection of his life and he could not stand it anymore and covered his eyes so that no one would see his tears. Why is this happening to me? I didn't do anything to deserve this. He cried, his voice breaking with tears. Sniff. I only wanted to be a hero. In that moment of vulnerability, when he had covered his face with his forearm to hide his tears, a soft but firm voice pulled him out of his abyss of despair. Why don't you try? Surprised, Izuku withdrew his arm and looked up, meeting the image of an unfamiliar woman. She had blonde hair and calm eyes of a peculiar shade that radiated compassion. She held an umbrella over both of them, shielding him from the rain with a gesture of spontaneous kindness. The presence of this woman, with her direct question and serene gaze, offered Izuku a moment of clarity in the midst of his personal storm. Something in her tone and posture suggested that she not only offered refuge from the rain, but also from hopelessness. With the rain still pouring down around her, and the umbrella forming a small barrier against the outside world, Izuku felt a spark of curiosity and hope. Perhaps, he thought, there was still a chance for him, a chance to prove that his worth was not defined by something as trivial as a quirk. Despite his initial gratitude for the woman's kind gesture and the warm feeling he began to feel, but something else he felt, and that was anger. Izuku felt his resentment towards heroes flaring as he realized she was one of them. Her statement left no doubt about her current feelings. I hate them, she replied sharply, turning her body so that she could no longer see the heroine. However, the woman was not deterred by his answer. She walked around the young man and stood in front of him again, holding her umbrella over both of them. Her expression was serious, but her voice retained a tone of genuine concern. Tell me, young man, why do you hate the idea of being heroes? Asked the heroine, whose quirk was apparently related to the power of a dragon. The words built up in Izuku's throat, and his frustration, built up over the years, found an outlet in that unexpected interaction. Nobody believes in me, nobody thinks a guy without quirk can make it. And you know what, I believe them. He exclaimed angrily. His voice cracked under the weight of his anguish. All my life I've worked hard, and no matter what, everyone was writing me off and damaging my achievements. And all because I was a person without quirk. The heroine listened attentively, her face reflecting a mixture of surprise and empathy. In the rain, with the sound of raindrops hitting the umbrella as a backdrop, the space between them was filled with a tense but honest communication. She, despite being a heroine, seemed different, willing to listen and understand Izuku's perspective, something she had rarely experienced from other heroes. Agent Izuku. A Tragic Ending. Part 3. That sounds incredibly harsh, she finally said, her voice low and soft. But we're not all the same, and not all heroes forget what it really means to be heroes. Some of us really want to make a difference, Izuku. Perhaps, together, we could. Her offer hung in the air, an invitation to consider a path Izuku had thought closed to him. The heroine's statement took him completely by surprise. Izuku was used to criticism and scorn, especially when his past and his lack of quirk were revealed. But the heroine in front of him was different. You don't know me. I am Izuku. Izuku confessed. You are, she had begun, and he braced himself for another insult, another blow to his already battered spirit. You're unbelievable. She shouted enthusiastically, and her sincerity was palpable. Izuku blinked, disoriented by the turn of events. She continued, her voice full of emotion, Izuku Midoriya, shunned by your family, with various backgrounds in your teenage years. Once you got into the Hero Association you climbed to the top only to be denounced for despicable things. Izuku was annoyed that he recapitulated his story so enthusiastically. Every word was a reminder of his struggle, his pain, his fall. He was about to tell her to go away, to leave him alone with his misery, when her next words stopped him in his tracks. But it is all false, she said with a confidence that echoed in the air. Izuku stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. His initial expression of frustration softened, replaced by a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. What do you mean, it's fake? She asked, her voice low, almost fearful of the answer. The heroine stepped forward, lowering her umbrella and letting the rain drench them both, symbolizing perhaps a new beginning, or at least a chance to wash away the past. I've been investigating, Izuku. The accusations against you, the evidence, everything was manipulated. You have enemies, but you also have someone who believes in your innocence and your potential as a hero, even without a quirk. His gaze was steady, defiant even against the storm around them. The heroine's words opened a small window of hope in Izuku's heart, one that had been closed and covered in dust for a long time. He could not believe it, struggling to come to terms with the fact that a top 10 heroine from Japan, someone he had never met personally, believed in his innocence. The sincerity in her words and the intensity of her conviction left him speechless. When your case became famous, I found many flaws in the accusations against you. The most obvious was the abruptness of the accusations. That made me suspect that someone with great power and influence was against you, she explained meticulously and seriously. And upon further investigation, I discovered that you were abandoned at the age of 4 and raised alone. That in itself is incredible. Even with that, you kept training. You never gave up. He exclaimed with emotion, his voice ringing with admiration and fervor. You never gave in, even if the country was against you. But, his voice softened and his expression became sad. But even someone as incredible as you found it hard to win an impossible battle. There was a pause, a moment of shared vulnerability in the rain that seemed to wash away the wounds of the past. Then, with a shy, sincere smile, she asked a question that touched the depths of Izuku's soul. I know it's not much, but would you like to be my friend? The words, simple but loaded with meaning, were too much for Izuku. He burst into tears, tears flowing freely for the first time in many years. He had never had someone to share his troubles with, never had someone to offer him comfort or friendship without conditions. As he wept inconsolably, Ryuko, the heroine, came over and enveloped him in a warm and compassionate embrace. It was a simple gesture, but to Izuku, it made a world of difference. In that embrace, he found something that had been missing in his life for too long, genuine compassion and the beginning of true friendship in this world where only cruelty existed for Izuku. Izuku's life began to take a positive turn under Ryuko's wing. Moving into her flat, he found not only a safe place to live, but also a space to revitalize both his body and spirit. With access to the gym at home, Izuku quickly regained his fitness and immersed himself in even more rigorous training, showing a dedication that impressed those willing to look beyond his past. Ryuko, seeing the potential and determination in Izuku, invited him to work at her hero agency. Although this decision was not welcomed by all, especially Mirko, who clearly despised Izuku for the rumors and falsehoods that still tarnished his reputation. The tension in the agency was palpable, but Izuku was determined not to be discouraged by the hostilities. The atmosphere became even more tense when, in a short period, Izuku confessed his feelings for Ryuko, and to his surprise and happiness, she accepted, becoming his partner. This only added fuel to the fire of discontent among some of the agency's heroines, who did not accept that a despicable man would be with their boss. Izuku, deep in his training, executed fluid movements, punching the air with precision. Suddenly, his instincts warned him of impending danger. With a backward somersault, she narrowly dodged a devastating kick from Mirko that cracked the gym floor. She didn't lose her momentum and spun around to throw a side kick. Izuku, quick of reflex, blocked the blow with his forearms and was thrown 7 meters away. Landing nimbly on his feet, he adopted a defensive stance. "What's wrong with you, Mirko?" shouted Izuku, confused and alarmed by the sudden attack of his girlfriend's friend. "I don't want to fight you, Mirko. But I won't let myself get hurt for no reason," said Izuku, remaining calm despite the danger. Mirko didn't respond. With a tense face and a steady gaze, he continued his assault. Izuku, concentrating on defending himself, began to frustrate her further. In an unguarded moment, he found himself cornered against a wall. "Shit!" he exclaimed as he realized his mistake. But it was too late. Mirko seized the opportunity and launched a vicious kick that hit Izuku and embedded him into the gym wall. The attack left Izuku dazed and in pain, reflecting on Mirko's unexplained fury. As he tried to compose himself, he understood that he needed to find a way to resolve this conflict. Mirko, driven by anger and pent-up frustration, roughly grabbed Izuku's shirt. His face reflected pure fury as he shook him violently. "If you decide to leave now, I'll spare you the pain," all his words filled with contempt, followed by a spit landing on Izuku's face before throwing him to the ground with brutal force. The humiliation and physical blow stoked a fire of anger within Izuku. His entire body tensed, ready to respond to the attack with equal ferocity. In that instant, however, Ryuko's words echoed in his mind, a reminder of the person he was striving to be. "Izuku, the world already has too much hate for you to give it more. You are someone with a pure heart, don't let that part one love about you disappear." Taking a deep breath to control the emotional turmoil, Izuku forced himself to calm down. He struggled to his feet, wiping the mixture of saliva and blood from his face, and faced Mirko with renewed determination in his eyes. "I will not allow you or the whole world to take me away from the only woman who has ever loved me regardless of the fact that I have no quirk," he exclaimed in a firm, clear voice. Izuku's response only served to inflame Mirko further. He shouted, his anger reaching a boiling point. Without measuring the consequences, he lunged at him with superhuman speed. With her hands clasped together to form a makeshift hammer, she slammed directly into Izuku's head, sending him crashing to the ground with a thud that echoed ominously through the gym. Not content with just that, Mirko continued his assault, repeatedly striking Izuku's face. Each blow was an outlet for his frustration and discontent, a venting of his uncontrolled rage. For what seemed like an interminable 15 minutes, his anger found no bounds, until, finally, the adrenaline began to dissipate and his mind began to clear. Looking down, he saw Izuku's severely disfigured and bloodied face, his reaction one of shock and horror. She had wanted to intimidate him, to keep him away from Ryuko, but never to cause him such grievous harm. She cursed herself for letting her anger drive her to such extremes. In a panic, Mirko rushed to lift Izuku, planning to take him to the nearest hospital, when suddenly a blurry figure whizzed past. Before he could react, Izuku had disappeared from his arms, carried away by someone or something that had intervened with supernatural speed. Mirko looked up, surprised and terrified to see the tearful face of her friend Ryuko. Through Ryuko's tears, Mirko could see a mixture of pain and burning fury. "Why, Rumi, why did you hurt the person I love?" cried Ryuko, her voice cracking with emotion and confusion over her friend's actions. "He doesn't deserve you. He's a criminal who only by sheer luck isn't in jail." Mirko replied vehemently, convinced of her words, but clearly upset. Ryuko pulled Izuku closer to her chest, trying to offer her some comfort. As she did so, she looked painfully at the damage inflicted. She knew that, had Izuku truly responded to the best of his ability, Mirko wouldn't have stood a chance. Izuku was not only a competent fighter with advanced techniques, but his greatest asset had always been his intellect. "Rumi, you're the one who doesn't understand," Ryuko exclaimed intensely, her voice cracking with emotion. "All my life I've been looking for the person I'd want to spend the rest of my days with, but all men only saw me for my beauty or my fame." Ryuko looked at her grievously wounded boyfriend and continued with a firm voice and a look that exuded a mixture of love and fury. "But this man here, despite having the whole world against him, has moved on." His voice hardened as his gaze turned furious, directed at Mirko. "But cruel people like you are making his kind heart go out and stain it with hatred." Ryuko's reproach left a heavy silence in the air. The gravity of her words highlighted the depth of the impact Izuku had had on her life, contrasting painfully with Mirko's destructive actions. When he finished his recollection, Izuku opened his eyes. The rain had stopped, and with it his tears. He felt the absence of his girlfriend's comforting warmth, an emptiness that seemed to echo in the stillness of the night. He got up slowly, hoping, perhaps Mirko would come out. However, she did not appear. Meanwhile, Mirko spent the evening in his room. With the abundance of heroes on duty, he thought he could afford a day of rest. After watching movies, she fell asleep unintentionally, and waking up in the middle of the night, she decided to fix herself some dinner. Before going back to bed, curiosity drove her to the window. She hoped to see that Izuku had left, assuming he wouldn't put up with the stress and rejection for so many hours and had left. "Fuck me," she exclaimed in surprise as she saw from her first-floor window that Izuku was still there, in the same spot where she had left him. Izuku's tenacity both confused and irritated her. For a moment, memories of her friend insisting that all the bad things said about Izuku were false came to mind. But quickly, Mirko dismissed those thoughts. Choosing to cling only to the memory of the betrayal she believed Izuku had committed against her friend, which she believed had caused her death. "I will make you suffer, Izuku," she muttered in a tone laden with venom. In that instant, her resolve solidified. Regardless of the truth, Mirko had decided that Izuku would pay, reinforcing his conviction that he must face him, not just for revenge, but for what he considered justice distorted by his pain and loss. 5 months had passed since those tense days, and each had been a test of Izuku's endurance. Rumi had adopted a despotic demeanor towards him, treating him more like a slave than a colleague. She sent him to do the menial and dangerous tasks, constantly demanding that he put himself in the line of fire to protect her. Under her orders, Izuku had become her human shield, sacrificing his own well-being to safeguard hers. At that moment, Izuku was in Rumi's room, bandaging a deep cut on his right arm, one more of the many wounds he had accumulated in this period. From a corner, Rumi watched with a sadistic smile, clearly amused by the situation. Suddenly, Rumi's phone rang. Glancing at her device, she checked the messages and her smile widened as she read one from Inko Midoriya. It was a new mission, one that seemed perfectly designed to put Izuku in danger. Without hesitation, Rumi accepted the assignment. Turning her attention to Izuku, she announced in an imperative tone, "Get up immediately, we have another mission." Izuku let out a resigned sigh and nodded. Though physically and emotionally exhausted, he knew that resisting would only make things worse. Every mission was a risk, every order from Rumi a potential disaster. But Izuku held out hope that he would eventually find a way out of this oppressive situation. As he stood up, mentally preparing himself for what was to come, a part of him longed for the moment when he could break free of this destructive dynamic. He knew he couldn't hold on forever. But his girlfriend had left him a mission before he left, and he would respect her last wish. In the gloom of the abandoned warehouse, Mirko and Izuku advanced cautiously, alert to any suspicious movement. The mission they had been assigned was clear: dismantle a drug-dealing operation run by local villains. However, what seemed like a routine mission would soon take an unexpected turn. As they moved deeper into the maze of dark corridors, Mirko's phone vibrated. When he saw the sender, a smile crossed his face, but his expression turned grim as he read the message: abandon him and let him die. Mirko's heart stopped for a moment. Though she had treated Izuku harshly, the thought of abandoning him to certain death horrified her. With determination, she typed her reply: I won't. She knew that crossing that line was profoundly wrong, even for someone consumed with resentment like herself. Inko's retort was immediate and chilling: fine, then you will die too, just like my rejected child. Mirko froze as she discovered that Inko was Izuku's mother, a detail that had never been revealed. Before he could fully process this revelation, he felt the sharp impact of a dart in his foot. Within seconds, a numbness took over his body, and he fell to the ground, unable to support himself. Izuku, who had been watching his back, rushed to his side, clearly concerned. Mirko, are you all right? He asked urgently. Agent Izuku. A Tragic Ending. Part 4. From the ground, Mirko looked down at Izuku, and in his eyes, for the first time, he saw beyond the life-hardened fighter. She saw the young man he once was, before adversity changed him, before the only woman who loved him was taken from his life. Guilt washed over her. She remembered her friend's words, defending Izuku against all accusations, and realized her mistake. She had acted on outside influences without seeking the truth for herself. Mirko tried to speak, desperate to warn Izuku that they were in a trap and needed to flee. However, the poison from the dart had paralyzed her ability to speak, leaving her unable to utter more than unintelligible whispers. Noticing the panic evident in Mirko's eyes, Izuku reached out, stroking her head gently as she assured her in a calm voice, relax, Mirko, I'll get you out of here safely. At that moment, the sound of numerous footsteps echoed through the warehouse. Mirko, with his keen senses still functional despite the poison, estimated that at least 100 people were approaching. Fear was clearly reflected on her face as she realized the magnitude of the danger that loomed over them. To protect her, Izuku made a quick decision. Taking advantage of the darkness of the place, he covered Mirko with his black polo shirt and carefully hid her among some boxes, making sure she was hidden from view. Mirko watched Izuku, aware that this might be the last time she would ever see him. Tears began to form in her eyes. She wanted to scream at him to run away with her, but she knew that, in her state, she would only be a burden to him. Before walking away to distract the approaching crowd away from Mirko, Izuku reached over and pressed a kiss to her forehead, a calming gesture meant to calm her fears. Don't worry, everything will be fine, he murmured with a calmness that contrasted with the gravity of the situation. His smile was soft, resigned. Anyway, this was Ryuko's last wish. With those words, Izuku walked away, ready to face what was to come, carrying with him the hope that his action could at least save Mirko. In his heart, he had accepted that he might not survive, but he stood firm in his decision to protect her, thus fulfilling Ryuko's final wish and honoring her memory in what might be his last act of bravery. That revelation sent Rumi reeling mentally, as she began to remember more clearly that chaotic day she had tried to forget. Flashback. Rumi, Izuku, and Ryuko had been sent on a mission by the Heroes Association. As they prepared to leave, Izuku voiced his concern, I have a bad feeling, I think we should call for reinforcements. Rumi, irritated by his caution, replied dismissively, don't be a coward, it's just a mission. Ryuko, trying to calm the atmosphere, smiled at her boyfriend. Take it easy, sweetheart. Besides, you're with 2 top 10 heroines. If anything goes wrong, I know I can trust you. Rumi clicked her tongue dismissively. As if this one without quirk can do anything. The 2 of us are more than enough. However, the reality of the mission soon belied Rumi's confidence. Arriving at the abandoned warehouse, which turned out to be All for One's last laboratory, they were ambushed by 15 nomas. The ensuing battle was fierce and they were clearly at a disadvantage. Izuku, despite not having a quirk, fought bravely, protecting her teammates while her body suffered severe injuries. Rumi, meanwhile, suffered a broken leg and nearly lost her life when a Nomu with sharp claws attempted to decapitate her. Although she dodged the deadly blow, the claw cut a deep gash across her face, affecting her vision due to the blood oozing out and covering her eye. Fortunately, the wound was not deep enough to affect his eye permanently, but the reduced visibility complicated his ability to fight. Ryuko, transformed into her dragon form, was putting up a formidable fight, but even she could see that the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Despite their best efforts, they were outnumbered and outgunned by the Nomus. End of flashback. Back in the present, Mirko recalled those moments with chilling clarity. The memory of Izuku, fighting bravely at his side, was beginning to change his perception of him. The initial contempt was now mixed with a sense of guilt and a belated realization of his courage and loyalty. Izuku had been there, protecting them against all odds, proving to be so much more than the quirkless she had despised. The irony of her current situation, where she had planned to abandon him, hit her with its full weight. Memories continued to assault Mirko's mind, each one more vivid than the last. In the midst of the battle, Ryuko, in her formidable dragon form and aware of her numerical disadvantage, shouted to her companions, "We have to leave and call for reinforcements." Mirko, however, blinded by her pride, flatly refused. "Never," she replied firmly, rejecting the idea of retreating and somehow admitting that Izuku was right. His pride would not allow him to grant her that satisfaction. The fighting intensified. Despite the overwhelming number of enemies, the trio managed to reduce their numbers. Ryuko defeated 4, Mirko 3 and Izuku 2. However, the physical toll was evident and all were severely wounded. Mirko felt fear grip her, with a broken arm dangling uselessly at her side and a leg that could barely support her weight. Izuku, meanwhile, was exhausted, and his fists ached intensely, as if he had been punching concrete walls. Ryuko, feeling the fatigue of maintaining her dragon form for so long, knew the situation was untenable. Aware that someone would have to sacrifice themselves to give the others time to escape, she made a heartbreaking decision. "Get the hell out of here," he shouted, launching a flare towards the 6 Nomus to drive them back. Although most of them retreated, 2 of them managed to dodge his attacks. One of the Nomus lunged towards Izuku, who nimbly dodged it and pulled 6 knives from his trousers, plunging them into the enemy's brain, ensuring his downfall. The other Nomu, aimed at Mirko, managed to connect with a brutal blow to her face, sending her crashing into a wall with a dull thud. Sprawled on the ground, dazed and in pain, Mirko began to realize the gravity of her situation. Ryuko had given them a chance to flee, but her refusal to retreat had put everyone in even greater danger. Now, with Ryuko distracting the Nomus, and with herself incapacitated, the reality of her stubbornness began to settle painfully on her conscience. It was a moment of stark truth. Her pride had compromised not only her safety but also that of her companions. With surprising agility and strength, Ryuko used her tail to catch the Nomus and hurl them away from her. Despite the imminent threat, her primary concern remained the safety of Izuku and Rumi. "Please go away with her and save yourselves," pleaded Ryuko, turning to Izuku urgently. Izuku, with tears in his eyes, flatly refused. "I won't do that. I won't leave the only person who loves me. I couldn't bear it." Ryuko, moved by his statement, used her tail to gently stroke a heartbroken Izuku, using those brief moments to say goodbye. "Listen, Izuku, the strength I was born with was to protect," she said with a sad but determined smile, "and I will use my strength to protect the 2 people I love most in the world." Izuku tried to interrupt her, perhaps to dissuade her or simply to express his despair, but Ryuko stopped him with a direct question. "Do you love me?" she asked. At Izuku's nod, she continued, "Will you do me one last favor?" Again, Izuku nodded, unable to formulate words at the magnitude of the sacrifice Ryuko was willing to make. "Take care of Rumi. I know she's an idiot, but she's like my little sister. Even if you watch over her from the shadows, do it. I know that someday she'll see the same thing I see in you." Ryuko then turned her gaze to Rumi, who, despite her dazed shock, was listening intently and with tears in her eyes. The emotion was palpable, and the air was heavy with the weight of impending sacrifice. "I love you both," Ryuko exclaimed loudly, before launching herself towards the regrouping Nomus and advancing back towards them. Izuku, with tears in his eyes, tried to hold a shaken and dazed Rumi. She struggled hard, desperate and fearful. "What are you doing, asshole? If we leave her, she'll die. If we don't do something, she'll die." Rumi was sobbing and screaming in panic. In the midst of her despair, Rumi continued to hurl hurtful words, until, overcome by stress and exhaustion, she finally lost consciousness. Izuku, feeling completely helpless, but knowing he had to act, called for reinforcements. However, when they arrived on the scene they found was desolate. Ryuko's scattered remains lay strewn about the area, macabre evidence that the Nomas had devoured her. Izuku, crumbling at the scene of the crime, fell to his knees and wept in despair. Shit, this can't be happening. He screamed, as he pounded his hands on the ground, overcome with guilt and frustration. It was then that Katsumi Bakugo, now the #1 heroine, approached him. Although she had matured a lot since the last time they met, her look towards Izuku had not changed. She still saw him as inferior, influenced by the rumors and alleged crimes attributed to Izuku. The accusation Katsumi would say next hit Izuku with the force of an emotional punch. "You're despicable, Izuku." Her words, laden with disdain, made Izuku react impulsively. Overpowered by a moment of anger and pain, he abruptly stood up and attempted to strike the one he once loved, but was quickly stopped by other heroes present at the scene. Katsumi, maintaining his composure and in a commanding voice, made his accusation, for abandoning a heroine and not calling for help in time. "You are accused of being an accomplice in the death of the heroine Ryuko." The consequences of those words were devastating. During the trial, Izuku found little support, and the situation was further aggravated when Mirko, influenced by her own resentments and the manipulation of others, testified against her. Inko Midoriya, taking advantage of her position and her hidden disdain for her own son, passed sentence with a cruel smile. "You will be sentenced to work all your life as my dog and obey my every command. You will also be forbidden to have any loving contact with anyone. From today you will cease to be human and will be treated as such. You will live alone and die alone," he declared with a coldness that chilled the room. Rumi, watching from the side, could not hide a smirk as she heard the sentence, satisfied with the cruel fate that had been imposed on Izuku. End of flashback. While Izuku distracted the enemies to protect Rumi, she remained hidden in the shadows, mired in a tangle of memories and guilt. It had been her pride and stubbornness that had led to the tragic death of Ryuko, her friend, and not Izuku's actions. She vividly remembered how Izuku, overwhelmed by grief and loss, had been excluded from saying goodbye at the cemetery, a right cruelly denied to him. Rumi, now aware of his mistake, lamented deeply as his keen senses detected the approach of not only a group of enemies but also two Nomas. The situation was desperate, and Izuku was doing his utmost to save her, even at the cost of his own life. From her hiding place, Rumi could hear the sounds of battle, the pounding, the shouting, and the sound of quirks being used. Izuku, despite not possessing a quirk, fought with a bravery and determination that defied his human nature. He had managed to defeat 20 opponents, but the physical cost was evident. His body was covered in burns, cuts and bruises, a testament to his fierce endurance. Tiredness and pain were beginning to take their toll on him, and each movement became more arduous. Izuku knew the odds were stacked against him. Amidst the chaos and despair, the leader of the attackers, a towering 6'2" man, cruelly taunted Izuku. With a sadistic grin, he declared, "You're unlucky. They hate you so much that they paid us a fortune to kill you slowly and painfully." Hearing those words, Izuku felt fear and adrenaline flood his body, but he didn't allow panic to overpower him. The boss thrust his finger and out of nowhere Izuku's instincts kicked in. He tried to dodge the next attack by moving quickly to the left. However, he was not fast enough. A shark-jawed Nomu lunged at him, tearing his arm off with heart-rending brutality. Aegrik. Izuku screamed, excruciating pain shooting through every fiber of his being. At the loss of his arm, before he could recover from the shock, another Nomu appeared and delivered a devastating kick that sent him flying through several walls. Izuku landed with a thud, vomiting blood from the impact and extreme pain. At that moment, he felt a sharp stab in his stomach and, looking down, saw a piece of iron that had pierced him. The reality of his situation hit him full force. With a mixture of resignation and relief, Izuku muttered with a sad smile, "Hehe, so this is how I'll die." Closing his eyes, he added softly, "Wait, Ryuko, I'll be seeing you again very soon." It was then that a familiar voice echoed in her mind, a voice she longed to hear, cutting through the haze of pain and despair. "It's not time yet, you can still beat true user of One for All." With a mixture of pain and astonishment, Izuku muttered to himself, "Wow, I went crazy before I died." However, in the midst of his confusion and suffering, the image of his girlfriend appeared before his eyes. She radiated a warm and powerful aura, similar to that of a shining sun, which gave him a sense of power and hope. Moved by a force that seemed to come from her, Izuku stood up, each step slow but determined, advancing towards his girlfriend's vision, towards that sun that promised warmth and salvation. The villains around him began to laugh, mocking what they thought was a delirium caused by his injuries. "He's gone mad," they commented with laughter. The leader, confident of Izuku's imminent defeat, snapped his fingers, signaling for one of the nomas to finish him off. The beast charged with speed, ready to ram Izuku with all its might. But just as the noma was about to reach it, Izuku, using his one good hand, slapped it across the face. To everyone's astonishment, including the leader of the villains, the noma shot through the air, crashing with great force into a wall and causing massive destruction. Impossible. The leader stammered, his voice tinged with fear. Agent Izuku. A tragic ending. Part 5. As the villains processed what had happened, Izuku continued his slow march towards his girlfriend's vision. When he reached her side, he reached up gently and caressed her face, feeling a warmth that seemed to heal and strengthen her spirit. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes as he murmured in a broken voice, "I missed you, my beautiful Ryuko." The figure of his bride, illuminated by an ethereal aura, offered him a reassuring smile and spoke to him firmly and lovingly, Fight one last time and be the hero that, sadly, this world will never know." Ryuko's figure dissolved into thin air, but left behind an energy that seemed to electrify Izuku. Yellow lightning streaked across her body, her hair fluttered as if driven by an internal storm, and her gaze, intense and defiant, struck fear into the hearts of the villains. In a resonant voice charged with a newfound strength, Izuku declared, "I hope you believe in God, for you do not leave here alive today." Fulfilling his promise, in less than 3 minutes, both the villains and the two nomas lay defeated at his feet. Looking around, Izuku surveyed the ruins of the battle. With a solemn and determined gesture, he held out his one hand and, from it, several black whips sprang up and moved with a will of their own. These whips swept everything in their path, destroying any evidence of the brutal confrontation that had just taken place. As the warm power he felt waned, Izuku moved towards Rumi. She, in shock, was sobbing quietly. The sounds of battle she had heard had been terrifying, especially Izuku's scream of pain, which echoed with soul-splitting agony. In that moment, Rumi realized how deeply she had erred in her life, especially in her treatment of Izuku. Suddenly, Rumi's eyes widened as she heard footsteps approaching. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw that it was Izuku approaching, but her joy quickly turned to horror as she noticed his condition. Izuku was badly injured, with a missing arm and a deep wound in his stomach that wouldn't stop bleeding. The sight was heartbreaking. "Sorry," muttered Rumi haltingly, struggling to find her voice amidst the pain and guilt that choked her. Izuku, still shrouded in the yellow rays that denoted the residual power of their confrontation, crouched down to be at Rumi's level. Despite his wounds and the obvious pain, he offered her a comforting smile, a sign of his unwavering forgiveness and understanding. In his smile, there was a glimmer of the kindness and resilience that had always characterized him, even in the darkest of times. "You don't have to apologize, Rumi," Izuku said in a soft but firm voice. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is to acknowledge them and learn from them." What he would say next would sadden Rumi greatly. "I found Ryuko," he said happily. Izuku turned his head and saw the image of Ryuko looking at him fondly. "Rumi time, she's here." Rumi watched as the illusion of happiness lit up Izuku's face, despite his obvious physical pain and exhaustion. When he joyfully announced that he had found Ryuko, Rumi knew he was hallucinating, probably due to blood loss and the extreme stress of battle. However, seeing the sincerity and peace that vision brought Izuku, she decided to play along, understanding that at that moment the most important thing was to support him in his vulnerable state. "You're right, Izu, you found her," she replied with a voice full of affection and a forced smile, hiding behind it the pain she felt at seeing him in such a state. As the yellow rays around him began to fade, Izuku began to feel the weight of his wounds more and more. He was weakening rapidly, and Rumi, concerned, settled on the ground and motioned for him to come closer. "Come, Izu, lie on my lap. You did an excellent job and deserve to rest." "Don't you think so too, Ryuko?" said Rumi, directing her gaze to where Izuku thought she saw her deceased friend. Following her gaze, Izuku saw that Ryuko, in her vision, was nodding with a reassuring smile. With a sigh of relief and accepting the invitation, Izuku trudged over and dropped gently into Rumi's lap. As he rested his head, feeling the warm comfort of her company, a presence that eased the pain and offered him a moment of peace amidst the chaos that had been his recent life, she began to stroke his hair, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to overflow. He slowly walked over and lay down on the floor as his head rested in Mirko's lap. Mirko stroked his head and held back the urge to cry. "Tell me, Izu, did you ever think about having a family?" asked Rumi, seeking to understand more about Izuku's personal dreams and desires. With a low voice and closed eyes, Izuku answered in a whisper, "Yes. I wished to have a family. I wanted to name my first child Akio, and if it were a girl, I would name her after you." Rumi felt a lump in her throat at hearing the name he would have chosen for a daughter, but before she could ask more, Izuku continued to explain, "I wanted my daughter to be strong, and to always fight for her ideals. Besides, Ryuko loved that idea." As he spoke, Izuku's voice grew weaker and weaker. With a visible effort, he raised his trembling hand and plucked out a strand of hair still glowing with yellow lightning. "Take this," he said, extending the hair towards Rumi. "Now I finally understood my quirk. I have the quirk to store a quirk and make it my own. Hee, that's why I was diagnosed quirkless, as I had nothing." Rumi listened intently, absorbing every word, knowing that these could be Izuku's last moments. Questions swirled in her mind, but she chose to remain silent, allowing him to continue. "If you eat this hair you'll have the power. Since it's my quirk, I'll call it Phoenix Force. I never told you, but I always thought you were cute." "Baka," was all Rumi managed to say, as she silently chided herself. If she hadn't been so blinded with her hatred, maybe she could have eased Izuku's pain, shattered after the loss of Ryuko, and maybe together, they would have forged a life together. Izuku settled better and closed his eyes to sleep. "Tell Ryuko not to leave, dash." Rumi was silent, holding Izuku's hand as he settled down to rest for the last time. Izuku's final words, asking them to tell Ryuko not to leave, echoed in her mind as a deep sadness settled in her heart. "Sleep well, Izu," Rumi whispered softly, as tears began to form in her eyes. She watched as Izuku's breathing slowed to a complete stop. The silence that followed was deafening, and in that moment, Rumi felt a part of her fade away as well. When her keen senses confirmed that Izuku's heart had stopped beating, the floodgates of her grief opened and she could no longer hold back the tears. Rumi collapsed beside him, sobbing with a mixture of grief, remorse and frustration. "Shit, why was I such an idiot?" she exclaimed between sobs. "If only I had believed you, Ryuko, if only I hadn't been so proud. I could have avoided all of this." The reality of her past decisions and the impact of her actions weighed heavily on her. Rumi regretted not seeing the truth that Ryuko had always tried to show her, and not giving Izuku the support and understanding he needed. Now, with Izuku gone, she was alone with her grief and memories, wondering how she could move on knowing that her pride and mistakes had contributed to such a tragic ending. As Rumi picked up the pieces of what was left, a small piece of paper fell from Izuku's pocket. With trembling hands, she unfolded it and began to read the words Izuku had left written, perhaps sensing what might happen. "If you are reading this, it is likely that my hunch about this mission was correct and that today is my last day. Throughout our time together, I often wanted to shake you up a bit, hoping you would see things from a different perspective, but I know Ryuko would never have approved of that. She always sought peace and understanding, qualities I deeply admired in her. Also, I understand why you hold a grudge against me. If I hadn't fallen in love with her, perhaps fate wouldn't have taken her away from us so cruelly. I understand and accept your hatred for me. My love for Ryuko triggered a series of events that, ironically, took her away from both of us. My heart has been filled with guilt and remorse, not only for what I lost, but for the pain it caused you. So, with every fiber of my being, I ask for your forgiveness for the pain I caused. Forgiveness for being a part of the reason you lost someone so important to you. It was never my intention to cause you so much pain. I ask that, if you can, you find the space in your heart to forgive me. Not for me, but for what Ryuko would have wanted. She believed in redemption and the goodness inherent in all of us. Sincerely, Izuku. The error of this world. Rumi, overwhelmed by the intensity of emotions and the sincerity palpable in Izuku's last written words, felt the full weight of remorse and regret building up in her chest. Izuku's words, full of pain and hope for forgiveness, broke the last barrier of his composure. In a moment of grief, unable to contain herself any longer, and heartbroken by Izuku's ultimate sacrifice, her body trembled with each sob that struggled to come out. Finally, she released the anguish she had been suppressing, screaming at the top of her lungs into the emptiness that surrounded them. Her scream, powerful and piercing, rose into the air like an echo of her inner torment, a cry for redemption. A cry of pain and loss for all that was irrevocably lost. This cry was not only an outpouring of grief, but also a call to heaven, an unanswered question of what might have been if things had been different. It was a cry that distilled the accumulated suffering of all the times when pride and hatred had prevented compassion and understanding. After releasing that scream, Rumi collapsed, completely empty and at the same time overloaded with emotions. She sat down next to Izuku, looking at his gently smiling face, and allowed herself to cry freely, each tear a testament to the mistakes made and the hope lost. Through this outpouring, the slow process of acceptance and, eventually, healing began, albeit painfully. Rumi, still with tears in her eyes, looked at Izuku's serene face, her own words welling up with a mixture of regret and resolve. I know it's silly to say it now, but I love you. If I wasn't such an idiot, I probably would have given myself the chance to really know you, she confessed in a whisper, her voice cracking with emotion. Then, looking at the luminous hair Izuku had given her, a symbol of his trust and hope in her, she continued, so I'll use the power you gave me to keep more good-hearted people from being hurt. Rumi took the hair and swallowed it, feeling a surge of power and determination flow through her. This new strength came not only from Izuku's quirk, but also from the weight of her legacy and her dying wishes. Rumi knew she had a responsibility, not only to Izuku but to all those who, like him, struggled in the darkness, often ignored or misunderstood by the world they sought to protect. Heart still aching, but now focused on a renewed purpose, Rumi rose. She looked up to the sky, as if seeking Izuku's approval, and promised herself that she would honor the memory of her two loved ones, not just with words, but with actions. End of story. I have started my classes at the university. I will try to keep a steady pace, but there will be times when I will be inactive due to my studies. Remember that on Sundays I will be reading your comments. If you have something to say, you can leave it in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Remember that if you are not subscribed, you can help me grow on YouTube by subscribing to my YouTube channel.
A giant hello to the subscribers and followers of the channel. If you want to be in this part of the video, just say so. The first to respond will be included in this section dedicated to greetings. Before you go, you can watch my last two videos. And if you like it, don't hesitate to subscribe. I would appreciate it a lot.